GameStop's restructuring plan is continuing on, and after the Q2 earnings call, it looks like GameStop is going to continue cutting expenses and doing what I figured they would do. In fact, if you go back and watch the previous video I did on GameStop talking about them doing mass layoffs, large amounts of layoffs from the top end, it wasn't really going to be a surprise to me when they started closing down hundreds of stores. And that's what it looks like they are now set to do. And it looks like it's just going to get worse, as in they're going to continue closing stores until they are pretty much solid, basically across the board, to where they're making money now, to where they can continue on and sustain. The problem I'm seeing with GameStop is that the market continues to push back against them, and I don't think it's going to get that much better. Like, I think they're assuming that when the next generation consoles launch next holiday, that things will be back to normal, and I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm not 100% sold that the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Scarlet will, quote-unquote, save GameStop. But let's take a look at what happened here so we can kind of go over it with GameStop and why they're closing hundreds of stores and where they can kind of go from here, because I don't think the outlook looks good, but I also don't think GameStop is going to go away in the next, I'd say, 3 years. I think they have another 3 years minimum still, like, under their belt with the amount of money they're making and the cuts they can make going forward, which are basically stores. So no, GameStop's not going to be out of business like by the end of the year or like next year or something like that. It's going to be a bit longer. I think there's a good chance they're even around when the next Nintendo system comes out, 3 to 4 years from now, or is even talked about, and that hype train starts up that would, again, aid GameStop. I think they'll be around for a bit there as well. So let's take a look here. And if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you hit the like button before you leave, and make sure you're subscribed so you can stay up to date on all the gaming news. So this is from GameIndustry.biz. And they say, during today's GameStop Q2 earnings call, the company announced it will be closing between 180 to 200 underperforming stores globally between now and the end of the year. Now, GameStop has, I believe, okay, there are 5,700 stores. I was going to say it was under 6,000 stores. I believe they used to have over 6,000 stores, like, worldwide, and they've just closed some here and there over the years. Think about how many are around you, because they do touch on that, and that was from the CFO, James Bell, during the call, kind of explaining why they're doing this, because it at least makes sense if you really sit down and think about it. And some of us have this experience in our local area with the GameStops around us. They say, while that is an impressive statistic, we have a clear opportunity to improve our overall profitability by densifying our chain. That work is well underway. We are on track to close between 180 and 200 underperforming stores globally by the end of this fiscal year. And while these closures were more opportunistic, we are applying a more definitive analytic approach, including profit levels and sales transferability, that we expect will yield a much larger tranche of closures over the coming 12 to 24 months. So they will be doing more, okay? And it sounds like it's going to be quite a bit more. And think about your local area. For example, in my area, I can think of 1, 2, 3, 4 GameStops within a 10-mile radius of me right now. Like, right now. It's not even that hard to think about places where a GameStop might be right across the street. I've heard of some malls where there are 2 GameStops, or a GameStop and an EB Games. Those are the same. That's the same company. Why are there 2 spots in the mall? My local mall, I think there used to be 3. It was a GameStop. No, it's just a GameStop and EB Games. That was the thing. There were 2 of them there for some reason. What a waste of money that is, if you really think about it. Now, I know GameStop bought and absorbed EB Games, essentially, right? Well, they basically merged, because they still left some EB Games stuff around and took some of their ideas, and basically GameStop took over EB Games, to my understanding. But you basically have to then work those out, whether you have to live out the lease, or you have to consider, okay, we'll save money by coming up with a deal with the landlord there, or the company, whoever's running it, and we'll pay out a lump sum to then cut the contract out and get out of there. I think some of the GameStops around me, for example, would benefit from just having like 2, because one is, okay, so yeah, one's in another state and the other one's in a separate state as well. So I think If there were 2 in my area rather than 4, I think things would still move on. I think the one in the mall, sure, it can stay, I guess. That probably gets a ton of traffic. It's easily a multi-million-dollar store there, specifically around Christmas time. But we don't need this many GameStops around us all at once. They're so dense. They're everywhere, as they say, de-densifying the chain. And then Bell also said that the company will be looking at alternatives for unprofitable business segments, especially internationally, though we did not specify which segments those were. Now, it's to my understanding that they may play around with the idea of doing more retro stuff, possibly in stores. We've already seen some retro games pop up in GameStops. I have yet to see it in person myself, but the retro market is still hot right now, and I think people would be more inclined to go into the store if there were retro games on the shelves. I just think that's the case. And here's the thing about GameStop. They are technically dropping in terms of profitability. They are not making as much money as they once were, and the quarter 2 earnings continue to show that, where they are dropping in some key areas when it comes to their business. It says this all comes as a part of GameStop's reboot plan, which was a major focus of its quarter 2 earnings report, in which it posted a net loss of $415 million and adjusted net loss of $32 million. And the biggest problem here is their used game sales are down. Like, it's not just like new console sales are going to be down, right? We're towards the end of the generation. I get that. You get that. Everyone understands that. But new console sales don't make money. They don't. Most of these places want to sell new consoles in hopes that you will then buy a controller, which you make money on, buy a headset that you make actually good money on, and buy used games. That is GameStop's thing. The used game sales need to stay consistent. Here's the issue, though. Used game sales are falling. Pre-owned and value video game product sales come in at $373 million, down 17.5% year over year. And that is, according to them, owing to the decline of console sales, which again makes sense. Someone comes in and buys a PlayStation 4, and then they look over and there's a used copy of Uncharted 4. Well, they'll probably buy that rather than the new one that's twice as much. To me, that makes sense. If there's a deal being run where it's buy 2, get 1 free on the used games, they're probably going to leave with 3 games thinking they got a deal with one of them being free, whereas they don't realize that GameStop gave like $2 per game and you just spent like $25 on them. So it's a good strategy when it works, when it's growing. And here's the other thing about this whole situation. We talk about used games, right? We're like, oh, good. Used games are how they're going to be making their money going forward. We hear about how the PlayStation 5 and the next Xbox, the Xbox Scarlet, have disk drives. Great. GameStop is so excited. They've mentioned this before. The sigh of relief, right? Whew. Here's the thing, though. It sounds like the next Xbox and the next PlayStation are going to most likely lean more and more into the DRM stuff. Now, there was an interview on Electronic Playground with Victor Lucas, and the developer for NHL 20, which is a lot of people forget about NHL 20, and I get it, but this is EA still. I mean, think about that. People within EA, it's a big publisher, right? Developer and everything. They definitely have access to those development kits. They're already working with them, I'm sure, for next year's games, whether it's Madden or NHL or anything else they want to do. They seem to lean in more or less to it being an always connected online device. Now, you can still play your PlayStation 4 and somewhat your Xbox One offline. We've talked about the Xbox One getting knocked offline and then it not working anymore, basically. But if we do go into next generation, it still has a disk drive, right? But the disk drive is more for delivery of your game, and it always has to be connected online. People will be more inclined to buy their digital stuff further on these systems, which means that the new game sales would drop, which means that the used game sales would drop even further, and Nintendo would be left, or GameStop be left selling Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony systems. And Nintendo's already been also kind of wading into that digital era with a lot of people buying digital games on the Switch. But now we see the PlayStation 5 and the next Xbox Scarlet to be always connected online devices, possibly more so than what we're already used to. And that could spell some serious problems for GameStop, whereas they think they're going into a generation that could possibly save them. It could actually hurt them more because people won't be buying different things alongside of their system. Used games, they might not grab those as much. Now, looking at, this is something else that keeps getting brought up, and I figured we'd go over this very quickly. The stock for GameStop, this is always brought up. It did drop, okay? So it's dropped quite a bit, obviously 12%, but here's the thing about the stock, and I will at least give them a bit of leeway with this whole situation. The stock was actually up. Like, they were actually trending upwards, you can see over the past month, and a lot of that has to do with, believe it or not, Wall Street. Some of the analysts are actually okay with GameStop right now. They're bullish. They're long on GameStop stock. They seem okay with it at times. I think what they're expecting is that GameStop is looking at rock bottom right now, and that they believe that investing heavily now could end up benefiting you in the future if they can turn it around. But I think a lot of us right now, and just in the gaming space who have been doing this for a while, we see an issue with GameStop that I don't know if they can solve. Now, GameStop's collectible sales were up. That's great, I guess. I mean, here's the thing. They just use percentages. I don't think collectibles would be a massive part of their business. I think you can still sell the newer stuff, but then also sell the retro stuff. And I think that would really help their business overall if they really leaned into that, because they get some pretty good deals on their website at times, and bring that into stores, you bring in foot traffic, and maybe that person who buys a Nintendo 64 game also buys a used PlayStation 5 or Xbox Scarlet game or a PS4 game as well, because they're more into the physical media. Obviously, they're there buying a Nintendo 64 game. You could be onto something there. So again, while I don't think the stock is right now as telling as people want to make it out to be, because it was already down so much. Now it's kind of up, and now it's back down. If you look at it through 6 months, it's obviously down, but you can kind of see it starting to tail up a little bit there. So I think there was a little bit of a light there for GameStop, but after these Q2 earnings, it's tough. Them closing stores, though, looks good to investors because they realize they're cutting expenses, which means there should be more profitability in the future. And if they continue to sell more stores or shut down more stores, 5,700 stores could drop. I think it's very possible anyway, below 5,000 stores, and they start to really tighten the belt going into next generation in hopes that they can become stable again and not be dropping so drastically. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. It is a shame to hear about stores closing, because generally when stores close, that means people lose jobs. But I'm hopeful that GameStop would look at the stores, transfer people around, especially if the store wasn't doing well, but the managers were hardworking and doing great work there. Hopefully they managed to shift them around. I've seen that before in companies that have to close stores. They'll shift around, the people who have been working hard and everything. So hopefully that is the case there. But let me know what you guys think about this situation down below. I'm very curious with GameStop. We talk about them quite a bit because it's very interesting to watch what is basically the last real game or video game focused retailer try to tough it out in what's coming up to a time when the industry just doesn't support physical retail stores that specifically focus on video games with all the digital stuff going on. Very, very interesting stuff. Thanks guys for watching. I'll see you next time.